Welcome everyone to another episode of the Soap. I am Daniel. Today we are going to talk about Avengers, in particular the latest movie, Infinity War. Now this episode I'm joined once again by Corey. Welcome back.
Hi everyone.
And for this episode we actually finally have Delphine on board. We've been planning to get her on for a while. Finally got it in the works. So Delphine, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Delphine. I'm a 30-something. I've been helping the Soap podcast in social media in particular. I'm mostly interested in Netflix and feeding my addiction to Netflix. I love everything, pop culture, series, movies, games. I'm definitely not an expert in any of the content, but I know a little bit of everything, I suppose. I'm really excited to be on.
Perfect. Well, we're glad to have you on board, obviously. So let's kick this one off. I guess where do we start, guys? Where's the starting point of the MCU? Would it be with the movies and the phase rollout?
Yeah, that's probably the best place to start, with Iron Man being released as the, starting point of the Avengers in 2008. It's not a bad place to start since everything else coincides with its release. So with Iron Man's release, it basically started the phase one of the cinematic universe we know now. Iron Man 2008, obviously Robert Downey Jr. was cast in that role and has ran with it. I personally think that he's basically what started the MCU as it is now. He was the most popular character, and I don't know if it would have been as big if you hadn't have cast him in that particular role.
The big thing about that is, do you think he would be as big without that role, though? Iron Man is definitely a big thing because of him, but I'd also say that he's a big thing because of Iron Man.
I'll agree to a point, but even then, if you look at his resume in terms of other movies, there's other movies of his that are really popular, and I personally enjoy, I guess, as well, which makes my opinion a little bit biased. But like the Sherlock Holmes movies that he's done as well are really well done, and they, I guess, were around the same time as Iron Man, I think. So I don't think it necessarily made him as an actor, but I feel like the actor made the role.
For me, the big thing about that movie was just the trailer alone. Everyone knows comics, and I guess you'd had the DC side and how dominant that had been in like the 90s, things like that. But when the Iron Man trailer came out with obviously Ozzy Osbourne, doing the track for it or them borrowing it from him, there's a huge feel, and it was something very different that I don't think we'd ever seen with anything Marvel before. And for me, that's what hyped it up for me. Delphine, what about you? How did you feel when you first saw the trailer for Iron Man?
I really enjoyed it. Very, very fun, and changed the expectations, I think, for the whole view of superheroes in cinema. I think it made it really in almost like it could be in the real world compared to a lot of mutants and so on. And I think the public was not necessarily ready to see that at times when it came before. And I think special effects at the time were really also something that helped the movie to portray what was a completely new character for me. I had never heard or seen Iron Man before that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It was a very realistic film, and it's not what you're used to with comics and that. You're used to powers and things like that, whereas Iron Man is a very believable character. There's still a stretch as to everything he goes through and everything he does, but there's definitely a realism that they added to that character that brought you into it. For me, phase one, though, the big moment was the Hulk. Now, we'd already seen Eric Bana do his attempt at that, and most people would agree that it wasn't the greatest movie that they'd ever seen. That movie with Eric Bana is what I always felt about the Hulk, though. I always felt he was a very simplex character that didn't have much to him, and I never really ever felt attached to any kind of Hulk material. When Ed Norton jumped in and did that, and the reason that I love this movie probably more than anything they ever did afterwards was because they turned a character that I really didn't care about and that I thought was a very one-dimensional character, and they gave it a very in-depth storyline that you could buy into. So for me, once again, phase one, bringing all these new things in, but the Hulk, it changed my perspective of it. Do you guys remember when the Hulk came out, or it's one of the forgotten things considering they changed the actors?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point, though, is the fact that not many people even remember Ed Norton as the Hulk. Everyone recognizes the new sort of era of it and forget that where it all started wasn't even with the actor that everyone recognizes. And yeah, and don't get me wrong, I personally, I know you like the Ed Norton adaptation a lot better. I love Mark Ruffalo as the Hulk. I think him as Bruce Banner, especially, is just it suits the character more as what, like you said, you pictured the original as what you pictured the Hulk. Mark Ruffalo is what I picture Bruce Banner as. Whereas the Ed Norton one, I agree with you that it is very forgotten and probably shouldn't be, considering, like you mentioned, it's where it started. But I feel like it was, and you're going to hate me for this comment, Dan, I really think it was an upgrade getting Mark Ruffalo for the future movies.
I don't know that upgrade is the word that would use. Like I said, I am very biased. I really love Ed Norton's performance of it because it changed my opinion of the Hulk and the whole storyline with the Hulk. But the way that Ed Norton did it and the way that the Avengers wanted to use the Hulk character felt very different. And I think that that's got to be a large part of why they would change it, because they wanted to do different things.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that. Again, just to an extent, I just I don't know really how to word it. I don't think the portrayal by Ed Norton was what fans of comics wanted as opposed to fans of the character, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So I just feel like it wasn't connectable enough to people who enjoy comics. As a movie, it's not a terrible movie, but it's just the way you look at Marvel as a whole, whether you look at it from a comic point or a movie point, definitely sort of alters your opinion on that.
Definitely. Delphine, what about you? Where do you find the Hulk lies? Do you like the new Avengers, Mark Ruffalo style? Do you prefer the Ed Norton, or are you an Eric Bana fan?
I'm definitely a Mark Ruffalo person. I've never been a very huge fan of the Hulk. Probably because the TV series of the 80s killed it for me with the very bad special effects. But I think that the way he currently fits in the MCU, that's what works for me. So that's my favorite one out of the three.
Well, there's a couple other movies because Phase 1 was all about leading up to the Avengers. So we had Thor, we had Captain America, but what we didn't have was Black Widow. What do you guys think went on there? Because they still haven't gone down that route yet.
It's look, it's a bit sad. I am incredibly impatient to see a female hero in the MCU happen rather sooner than later, and I know we're probably looking at that in the future. Certainly, the first few phases that we had with a lot of the Marvel movies were definitely centered around male characters, and that may have been answering what the audience was looking for at the time. I think, though, that there were some interesting characters that we saw as part of the first Avengers and also as part of Captain America, but also Thor, with more and more interesting female characters in there as well, that were not just like, Iron Man's girlfriend.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing what they did with all of that, and I'm surprised we still haven't seen a Black Widow movie. But on the other token, like on the other side, where does she fit in as a superhero? We don't really see many powers or that with it. We hear a lot about how great she is, but we never get to see it in the movies.
I think it's really forgotten to an extent, though, what she did, not necessarily in the storyline of the movies, because she hasn't been given a backstory other than she was put into a terrible place. That's pretty much all we get told about her original backstory. Whereas the premise of the Red Room, which is where she was created, is a really interesting story arc that I genuinely think they could have turned into a movie if they had wanted to. But I also see it as a little bit too little too late now just because of how far they are into it.
Yeah, and I don't remember at which point in time we had some big failures of Marvel character movies, and Elektra was one of them. And I think there's been all the way up until Wonder Woman a huge fear from a lot of Hollywood and producers at actually tackling a female hero.
Definitely. Well, I mean, the big thing was building up to the Avengers, the very first movie, throwing everyone in. A lot of things happened with it. How did you guys find that compared to, we'd seen single movies, we'd seen cameos or references or that. The Avengers original movie is the first one where we saw 5 of them, or if you want to include Hawkeye in that, multiple people all teaming up against one enemy. How did Avengers change, the first Avengers movie change the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
All right, let me start by saying no one ever counts Hawkeye. All right, let's just acknowledge that now. Um, but they did really well with it because if you watch from Iron Man through to Captain America, you don't see a massive link between them. Something that it ties it all together other than a few snippets here and there, maybe a few post-credit scenes. When you get to Avengers, you would expect it to be rushed, trying to push them all into the same area, same goal, all that sort of stuff, but they did really well pacing-wise to bring in each character separately to link them to the Avengers and build that story around them.
I have to agree, it was very clever. And I think it was really, very interesting to see them all together. And that gave us a preview of the type of villains that could be more powerful and where they would need the team to defeat them. And this idea of the team, but the tensions happening in the team were really interesting. And I think they did that very well while not making it rushed and just putting them all together just to make a movie. I felt that the writing was made well enough that it came quite naturally for them to come together.
The writing was obviously a very big point for a lot of the movies, and it was done so well in phase 1. For me, switching into phase 2, a lot of it was sequels, and I felt like they struggled a lot with it. You had Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, Captain America the Winter Soldier. For me, this wasn't the strongest of the phases. How did you guys feel during phase 2?
I'll agree with that pretty much wholeheartedly. It felt more like building up to phase 3. If you look back at all the movies now, knowing what we know, all of them were leading to the end, like the mid part of phase 3. But I think they did a slightly poor job on trying to force the Infinity Stones into the storyline through sequels. Like you have Thor: The Dark World, they just magically find the Aether. It's There's no real context as behind why they just happen to find it. As well as Captain America: Winter Soldier, I felt was really just trying to push characters that they knew would be important in the long run into a story. The Winter Soldier being obviously the main character and the main villain of the movie, felt like now it was only made so that he could be relevant in the future. I don't think it was really a necessary movie.
Absolutely. I have to agree with that. It just is the time when, for me, it became, as someone who has not read the comics, that's the time when it became very confusing. I think the depth of the Marvel Comics universe really started to appear for me. And I think that for people doing the movies, it also started to be a little bit complex. It's very difficult to put in films. And at this point in time, they really had to pull a little bit from the comics to try to put together, I think, in preparation for phase 3. And, Guardians of the Galaxy was very good, and I think Ant-Man was very good, but the other ones, I don't know, I think something just didn't quite work in bringing them together as whole movies. I think they make sense as part of the whole phases, but they are not very good movies by themselves.
On that though, even though I'm going to slightly contradict myself by saying that they felt like they were just trying to force characters into it, I have to give credit to Guardians of the Galaxy. Honestly, one of my favorite ones in all of the phases, and the way that it was done, not necessarily like, here are all of the Guardians, here's a story, go with that. They did a really good job of introducing each Guardian individually to the story, and then at the end finally going, okay, here's the set cast that we have. Now we're going to leave them alone. We're not going to go near them again until the next phase, just before basically the main fight of the entire series.
Guardians of the Galaxy was definitely a gem that came from nowhere. And I think a lot of that has to be credited to the way that Chris Pratt slotted into that role. He brought a very fresh humor that fitted in well with the storyline. And the storyline was very well written. It flowed. It had all the elements you wanted to see. You know, you were laughing. There was action. There was a great storyline. They added Groot, which kind of gave you that kind of nostalgia like Chewbacca did in Star Wars. Like, it was a lovable character. It wasn't forced like, say, Jar Jar Binks. And I think there was a huge bond between every element in that film. And phase 2, the best part of it was the new movies, Guardians of the Galaxy, but also, surprisingly, Ant-Man, which is a movie that I thought was going to be probably the worst one that I'd ever seen, and yet is oddly one of my more favorite ones. How did you guys find Ant-Man?
A huge surprise. I was really reaching Marvel fatigue by that point in time because I didn't feel, again, with the exception of Guardians of the Galaxy, that it was always very well written. And it was a shame because they were using characters that I love, but it just didn't work for me. So when Ant-Man came, I honestly thought, "Oh, this is just one more. Isn't it time that they stop bringing all these guys that I've never heard about?" And it was a huge surprise. It was really, really great. The powers, the character can do new things that we had not seen before. I thought it was well written. The character is funny. You really feel some empathy for him. A huge surprise for me. I expected it to be crap.
I don't know, my whole issue with it was the fact that the end of phase 1 was the Avengers movie. Everything in that phase led up to that movie. Whereas when I initially heard about it, Ant-Man was just stuck at the end of the phase after the second Avengers movie. It seemed so out of place and so random just because Ant-Man isn't an extremely well-known character if you don't know comics. He's not a character you see on billboards and cereal boxes and that sort of stuff that little kids recognize. So they took a sort of bold move introducing him after the key movie in the phase. But like Delphine said, it pulled off really well for the simple fact that you felt for the character throughout the movie, which was something that wasn't expected when you first heard about its release. But yeah, they definitely did a really good job of it in terms of not forcing it as such, as in fans could go watch the movie, not even think of it as an Avengers movie, and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think Paul Rudd being cast in that role is what saved that film. You put the wrong person in that role and, who knows where that movie would have ended up going. But Paul Rudd is probably the key to everything going right in that film. Now, you mentioned it being after, I guess, the Avengers movie. Age of Ultron is a very interesting film, and it added a lot more characters that didn't even have their own movies. One of the things I'd like to bring up is the missing of the X-Men universe in it, and Quicksilver being in the Avengers. What did you guys think about how we saw the X-Men using Quicksilver compared to him also appearing in Avengers, yet the universe is not linking?
Well, see, I think they have a major problem when it comes to introducing Quicksilver and even Scarlet Witch into that, I guess, series of movies, only because they also had the X-Men franchise running at the same time. And with the backstory of the Maximovs being that they're the children of Magneto, you couldn't introduce them with a proper story that relates to comic books without introducing the entire X-Men universe. And I think they wanted to hold off on that until they established the Avengers first and built a series around it before adding in an entire other element that could destroy everything that they've built.
I really like Quicksilver as a character, and I really didn't like what they did with it in the Avengers movie. Not only because of what happens to him in the movie, but it was the 101 on how not to, use a very powerful character for me. And again, I think the idea that they had very limited backstories in the movie that did not work very well. Whereas I think what they've done with the Quicksilver character in the X-Men movies in the new generation, that's made it fun, and that's using a little bit more properly the very strong powers that he has.
Well, that all led into Phase 3. Now, we'll save the actual Avengers Infinity War movie for last, but Phase 3 for me, leading up to the Avengers, felt like a very different change to Phase 2. The movies felt stronger, but they also felt a lot more full on. Captain America's Civil War, there was a lot that went on with that, and it led into a lot of the other movies, Black Panther and that. How did you guys feel? Did Phase 3 feel different to you? Did it feel the same? Do you think it was too convoluted?
It felt like it was coming together. Doctor Strange for me was quite a surprise. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. They did a very good job at bringing back some of the things that happened in Phase 2 that I think were these areas that were a little bit far-fetched for people who just see the movies and don't necessarily understand the whole universe. They brought that very cleverly in the Phase 3 movies. While they managed to keep it in each movie all the way up until Infinity War, that really helped, I think, the public start to understand a little bit more about the fact that it's not just Earth. There are the Infinity Stones. There are some tensions on Earth between the characters as well. It was done very well, and it certainly for me felt like it had a fresh air on it. It was much better than the previous 5 or 6 movies of Phase 2.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. I think the main issue with Phase 3 that I had came from, I guess, the very first movie. The whole Civil War angle was something that I'd really, really looked forward to as, I guess, the comic book nerd of the podcast. But it just fell flat for me in terms of story because they had to change so many aspects of it to incorporate every character that they could, including like Black Panther, that sort of stuff. It just felt, I guess the ending felt not up to scratch for what I was expecting, but that, for those who haven't read comics, it was probably a great movie. It's just a personal thing that I have with it. It didn't feel as good as I thought it could be, and from then on, the rest of the movies I thought were great. Doctor Strange, the Benedict Cumberbatch as the actor, makes it incredible to me. I think he was one of the perfect choices for that movie. Guardians of the Galaxy 2, like I said, number 1 was one of my favorite in the series. Number 2 just expanded on that and made it even better. Spider-Man Homecoming, I think, was very good, just that it didn't follow the same origin movie that the first 2 incarnations of Spider-Man followed. So it was something different, and it felt different, which I think is a good thing in this case. Then you obviously have Thor Ragnarok, which again was a really, really good movie, incorporated both the Hulk back into the story. It also gave Asgard and Thor a different feel to what you'd seen in the previous movies. And Black Panther was the highest grossing Marvel movie in the entire franchise, so I think that pretty much says enough for how good it was.
It's interesting that you mentioned the comics, Corey. Obviously, that's where everything came from, and there are a lot of differences between what was written in the comics and what's happened in the movies. Now, a lot of reasons for that in terms of how long the comics have been going, the technical limitations between actors, effects, and the way that they've made things a little bit more realistic. Maybe we should go back and talk a little bit about where the Avengers started as a comic, Corey. Can you give us a bit of information about that?
Yeah, of course. There was obviously the Avengers that we see now in the original lot of movies that we got. So Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Captain America were basically the main four that everyone recognized, which is all well and good from a marketing standpoint because they're more recognizable than, I guess, the original Avengers, which alters very slightly, but I think was a very noticeable change if you've read the comics, which is Captain America, who is basically the leader of the Avengers, completely changes and isn't even involved in the opening comic, which was replaced by Ant-Man, who we got introduced to after the second Avengers movie. So it was a little odd for me seeing that one of the originals was left until the very end of the second phase was a little bit hit and miss, but I understand why they went for it. And actually his sidekick, I guess you'd call it, the Wasp, is the one that gave the group the name The Avengers, which is a nice little fact. The roster then changed pretty much straight away. Ant-Man became Giant Man, which for me is extremely weird. I don't even understand that. And the Hulk left when, I guess, a mimic of the movies, he left when he realized that people feared him, which I guess is understandable thing when you're a 7'2" giant green monster, but
Is that what leads into the whole Planet Hulk storyline? Is that where that happens?
no, Planet Hulk is actually, weirdly enough, in the comics, there's an evil group which has been mimicked in real life, the Illuminati, who is comprised of a bunch of superheroes and supervillains. They fear Hulk and the damage that he could do to the Earth, so they put him on a ship, send him off, and lands on another planet, and that starts the whole Planet Hulk series.
Is that like a reference in Ragnarok, Thor Ragnarok, to that storyline? When I saw the movie, knowing a little bit about that timeline, I thought that maybe there was some kind of reference there to that storyline. Is that right?
I guess it could be perceived that way because the whole Planet Hulk arc is he gets shipped off without obviously knowing where he's going, lands on a planet, becomes the leader of that planet, and then becomes stronger and stronger and stronger the longer he's there. If you watch Thor Ragnarok when he fights Thor, you can see that there's a power difference. When they've fought previously, you'd have to give the advantage to Thor throughout it. But when you watch the fight in the arena at Thor Ragnarok, it is a lot more close than I think would be expected if it wasn't somewhat related to the Planet Hulk storyline.
And in Planet Hulk, he was a gladiator fighter at the start when he landed on the planet as well. Is that right?
From my memory, yeah, you're correct. I think it's just a slight difference in the planet is obviously different, and it's also ran by the brother of the Collector in the movie, whereas from memory, I don't think anyone actually runs the gladiator arena in Planet Hulk. I think it's more just a source of entertainment for the people that are on the planet.
It's very interesting looking at the comics and the way that there's been changes between them and things that have happened in the movies. Like we already mentioned that there is a difference between the original team members. Talking about Avengers, Infinity War, there's some big differences between comic book Thanos and the movie version. Now, I believe, and I haven't actually read it, so you might have to help me out, Corey, but Thanos had different motivations for why he chose to want to kill half the universe. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, in the comic book adaptation of what the movie calls Infinity War, but the comics call Thanos Quest, his motives are extremely different as opposed to in the comics, he does everything he does, the mass genocide, everything is completely done to win the affection of, weirdly enough, the character Death. He is in love with Death and wants to do everything he can to impress her, which is very different to the movie where the plot is basically he sees it as a way to benefit the world and the galaxy and every single planet. So there's a very big alteration, which I guess they did for the longevity of the movies. I think if you just put him as a character and go, okay, go kill millions of people so that you can impress Death, it's kind of hard to make a 2-movie series out of that.
Delphine, how did you find the original story with Death and being the motivation for Thanos wanting to eliminate half the universe? Did you enjoy it? Do you think it would have worked well in the films, or?
I'm not sure it would have worked all that well. I think removing his motivation away from love is probably a smart thing to do in the case of the movies. It also makes him. We almost at times can feel empathy for his motivations in Infinity War, which is very different from what I have read about, the Titan and the murders that he commits in the comics for love, which, while a great motive, in this case is not exactly amazing. So I think that it makes it a little bit more believable. It makes it sound less like a stupid motive. And I think we can relate to that in looking, at the way we treat our planet and so on, and on whether these sort of things of overpopulation and so on, I think are real concerns for a lot of people. And it makes the movie and the villain, it's almost as if we understand him, which is amazing, because what he wants to do and sets out to do in Infinity War is pretty awful. So I think it is actually quite smart.
I think there's also another key reason as to why they've changed the story to suit it a bit better, which goes back to us mentioning that they didn't want to bring in other sides of the Marvel universe into Avengers just yet. When in the comic book adaptation, basically the one that tells him why Death brought him back, and basically the messenger between the two is the Silver Surfer, which I don't think they felt was a necessary character to bring into the story sort of out of nowhere. So I think they have changed it as well just to limit what characters needed to be introduced.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that plot. It centers around the Infinity Stones. Now, Corey, you've read a lot about these. Can you tell everyone what these Infinity Stones are and why they're so important?
Yeah, the premise of it is that the gauntlet that Thanos wears was crafted by basically the dwarven smiths of Asgard in the heart of a star. Same place that all of the Asgardian weapons were made. The premise is that each stone has a different control over the initial balance of the universe. When the Big Bang happened, according to the storyline, it created 6 objects that basically represented each aspect of the universe, and this was done by a set of, I guess, higher powers within comics called the cosmic entities. Each one obviously having a different ability. The Space Stone is the blue one, which is the teleportation. So you can basically just go anywhere in the universe whenever you want, is the ability of it, basically. After the Space Stone, we heard about the Aether, or the Reality Stone. It has the ability to basically change people's perception of reality and that sort of thing. It's a really strange concept, but really cool when used correctly. Then there's the Power Stone, which amplifies the user's ability, as we saw that it wrecked entire planets when it came to Guardians of the Galaxy. It's also actually one of the hardest ones to control by a single being why it needed all 5 of the Guardians to be able to use it. The most, I guess, seen one throughout the movies without realizing it's being seen was the Mind Stone, ability to control people's mind, and basically it's just a mind control ability. Was seen in Loki's scepter, and then created Vision. The Soul Stone, which was a very, I guess, unknown thing throughout the movies because it wasn't. It was the last one that was noticed. No one even had an idea of where it was, which we'll go into that a little bit later, so I'll leave that one. And then we have the Time Stone, which is Doctor Strange's ability to control, like, reverse, go forward in time, that sort of stuff. When you have all of them, you basically have the ability over every aspect of the universe. You control how everything works, and the only way to be able to do that was with the gauntlet that was created for Thanos.
Now, an interesting fact with these gems, so we talk about there being 6 specific ones that, do all of this. There's actually a couple of other gems that exist out there that have appeared throughout the Marvel universe in the comics. You've got the Ego gem, which contains the consciousness of the cosmic entity Nemesis, and recreates her when united with the other 6 gems. You have the Rhythm gem, and you also have the Build gem. Now, I thought that was a very interesting fact that, obviously there's this big storyline with the main 6, but they actually have other ones out there that they've thrown in at their own will. Do you guys think that maybe like these gems might come into play in the future movies, or do you think that they'll just stick with the main 6?
Look, I think it'll be interesting to see the stories that they write and how they bring in some other characters, and we expect Captain Marvel to possibly be a big part of the second Avengers movie in Phase 3. It is possible with her powers that she could use a 7th stone, and in particular the Ego Stone, but I think it would have made for many stones if they had to bring them all in, to be really honest. I think in Infinity War it made sense as to what was the power of each of these stones, and it's already quite complex in that. The powers of the other stones start to be really out there. It's very difficult to fathom and to explain, I think. So I'm not sure that it's somewhere they want to go.
You heard how hard it was for me to explain the use and the abilities of the original 6. Now imagine they throw 2 extra stones in there and I need to explain that. I agree that I think it's a little bit unnecessary at this point when you've built up the entire premise of these 6 stones that Thanos has scoured the entire universe for, and then for them to turn around and go, oh yeah, by the way, there's 2 extras. I think if they do it, it's a very poor decision. I think you don't need it when you already have the power of a existence, basically.
Yeah, these ones aren't main ones or anything like that. They're in their own little pockets of storyline, but it's just a very interesting fact that in the universe overall, there is a little bit extra with it. Maybe we should start talking about the overall plot for everything. We've talked about Thanos having a gauntlet with Infinity Stones. Delphine, maybe you can tell everyone about the overall plot as to what's happening in this movie.
Okay, well, I mean, understanding Thanos and how he's seeking the stones is basically the core plot of the movie. And as different teams and different people that have been in contact with the Avengers or have by themselves worked against evil in the MCU start to realize that he's after the stones. They go on a mission to try to stop him before he gets all the stones. That's pretty much the plot of the movie in a nutshell.
For me, one of the big things that led into this movie, correct me if I'm wrong, goes back to the second Avengers film where Tony Stark sees the future of everyone being dead and how that changes him. Now, obviously, it worked into Civil War, but I felt like that had a very strong place still in this movie. What did you guys think? Do you think he's still living on that fact that he feels responsible for everyone?
Well, I think yes, only because a lot of the visions and things you see throughout Avengers and even just comic books in general, they usually aren't relevant at the point you expect them to be, but they're relevant 5, 6 issues later when you least expect it to happen. When Tony Stark invented Ultron in the second Avengers movie and had this vision, you automatically expected it to be, oh, okay, that's what he's expecting to happen. He feels responsible because it was his creation. I don't think it was a reference to that at all. Like you said, I think it's a reference to what is happening in the MCU now with Thanos and basically where that storyline is going.
There was a big set of plots around everyone feeling responsible for their own thing in this movie, and it led to all the characters splitting up in their own direction, and that's how they all unite, I guess, over the entirety of this movie. And as a thing for me when watching it was that it felt very full on in terms of how many different plots were going on. There seemed to be a lot of teams going off in their own directions rather than everyone working together. Now, Thor obviously is one example of that. He's jumping around everywhere, you know, completing his own quests. Then you have Vision off on his little side quests. How did you guys feel about so many characters having so many different plots going on during one movie?
I think it was a little bit all over the place at times. The obviously the love story and that sort of stuff, while I understand why it was there, is a little bit, I guess, forced when it didn't have to be. There's that much action and that many different branching storylines in this movie that they had to remove so many characters from previous Avengers movies to fit them all in. So you take away a lot of the unnecessary stuff. You can fit an Ant-Man into the movie, you can fit a Hawkeye into the movie, but instead they've replaced it with a couple of storylines that I didn't feel were 100% needed.
It's very, very busy. It's a long movie. It's about 3 hours, and they packed a lot of it. It makes it super fun. It's very entertaining, but it also makes it a little bit confusing. I found that understanding the timelines in particular was very difficult. I'm not sure whether you felt at times that everything is meant to be happening at the same time, but they're traveling to different galaxies and so on. And I'm thinking, like, wow, they travel very fast in between some of these things if we think that this is happening all at the same time. So some of it is a little bit confusing because they just packed so much. And I feel that if you have not seen all of the other movies and understand the characters, their powers, and so on, it would probably be very, very confusing to understand. All in all, I think though it kind of works, but for me it worked not because it was well written and so on. I think once Thanos has some of the stones, I was surprised at him not using them a certain way, but I think there's only so many things they can do in the movie. But yeah, look, I think it's very busy. They all work together. It's a little bit confusing around the timelines because I'm not sure things are happening all at the same time. But all in all, it kind of works. It's still entertaining. The plot altogether works, and we understand motivations of all the characters and what they're trying to do. So it's busy, but it's also a lot of fun.
All right, well, here's a question for you guys. We talked about how powerful these Infinity Stones are, and that Thanos' motivation is to get all of these stones so he can eliminate half the universe. The Avengers, across all of them, actually happen to have a whole bunch of these stones already. Why aren't they powerful enough to stop Thanos before Thanos gets all the stones?
I think it's a knowledge situation where they don't understand the stones to the level that Thanos does. Like, you watched in Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm pretty sure that's the only time I can recall one of the Avengers particularly using one of the stones. And he picked it up, attempted to use it, him being Star-Lord, and nearly got ripped apart. And he thought it was the greatest idea in the world. It took all 5 members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and for those who haven't understood the story completely, because it can be a bit confusing at times, Star-Lord is basically a god, and he could not pick up that stone without nearly getting torn apart. It takes a lot to prepare and be able to use them. Like, Thanos is conqueror of worlds and needs a gauntlet forged by the same people that make Asgardian weapons to be able to use one of them. I think that says a lot as to why the Avengers and the Guardians didn't just pick up stones and start abusing the powers to defeat Thanos.
I can understand the Guardians not being able to do it. They didn't have any tools or anything like that. But we do have Doctor Strange, who has control of his, and we have Vision, who is essentially part of the stone. Where's the link between that? They seem to have control of their stones.
You mentioned particularly the Eye of Agamotto and the Time Stone. You see that obviously Strange does have some grasp of it in his movie, the ability to just keep replaying the same part of time over and over again until he basically pisses Dormammu off enough that he leaves. When it comes to Vision is a very, I guess the best word is complex character, whereas he is the complete polar opposite of what Ultron was. Ultron would kill without a moment's notice and destroy the world just for the lols. Whereas Vision, I don't think, has it in him to do any of that. So Vision's basically out of the question as for the fact I don't think, has the ability to kill Thanos or even incapacitate Thanos like we'd expect him to. As for Doctor Strange, we watched Strange try to use the stone. It just backfired and didn't work, and I don't think that's necessarily down to Strange's ability with the stone. I think that's once again down to Thanos having more knowledge of how all of the stones work, as opposed to even the people who control them.
I think it also is combined with the fact that even all the way into Infinity War, none of them are working together as teams very, very well. We have these mini teams that seem to work together, but very much at the beginning of the movie, we understand that they're all coming away from different areas and they have not been working as a team. So for me, they're just lacking, this sort of common knowledge of thinking, okay, we do have some stones, we might need to do something together with the stones. They're not all together at that point in time. And as a matter of fact, you have Tony that pretty much thinks that he's going to go and save the world on his own. They all just are too separate from each other, I think, to have been able to bring the stones together and understand and use them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, especially considering even in the movie adaptation, you don't see a group of more than maybe 5, 6 of them max together at one time. Whereas Thanos only has 5, 6 minions. He has the Black Order or the Cull Obsidian, and they have no issue fighting together and working together. Whereas even the groups of 5 or 6 Avengers that are together are extremely reluctant to do anything.
Yeah, and you have them whenever they're working as a team, and sadly the only moments that they're working as a team, it still fails. So they're just not working together very well.
Now, talking about working together and that, for me, I was very interested in the very start of the movie. We see Thanos and Thor having it out with the Hulk appearing as well. Thanos has his lieutenants there. Now, Thanos we know a little bit about from Guardians of the Galaxy and that kind of thing. His lieutenants, so he starts off with Ebony Maw, Cull Obsidian, Proxima Midnight, and Corvus Glaive. These characters, they look very cool, and I'm sure they've got story, but I felt like the movie didn't really give them a story yet wanted to include them as main characters.
Did you feel it was needed though? I really, sadly for them, I did not feel like it was really needed. They're just the minions. And I think it works for them in the movie. And in a lot of ways, for me, the way it works is it only makes Thanos more important. I did not expect that I would think that he's a great villain. I knew that he was very important in the universe, but I didn't know how it would work out in the movie. And actually to have these dedicated people that are so strong, that seem to have, great powers, serve him, but they're almost replaceable. I think that makes him even look stronger.
It's a very good point. What about you, Corey?
It is, but I'm going to disagree to a slight extent on the case of certain ones of them. Like they've obviously actually changed the name of some of the characters, because in the movie you mentioned one of them's called Cull Obsidian, that sort of stuff. The actual group in the comics is called Cull Obsidian. It's not the name of a character. But in particular, Corvus Glaive, Ebony Maw, and Proxima Midnight are really, I guess, loyal to a fault to Thanos, which, considering in this movie, there's certain parts of the movie where you genuinely feel for Thanos. You don't see him as this world conqueror or the Mad Titan as he's constantly referred to. You genuinely hurt for Thanos at certain points throughout the movie. And I think the fact that he has this group of 5 extremely powerful people that no matter how stupid the mission, no matter how much you know that they're going to fail, will do it solely for him, makes you feel like there's another aspect of Thanos that isn't really looked into, and it's the fact that they don't even just worship him because of how powerful he is or anything like that. They worship him solely to worship him.
Yeah, but does that work with the story, that we almost don't need to know in a lot of detail who they are, because it would distract from actually trying to understand that dimension of Thanos we don't know?
I feel like it was kind of necessary on the simple premise that if you, especially considering the fight takes place in that many cities and that many areas, with the main fight obviously being in Wakanda, I don't think it would have been possible to make that movie work with just Thanos popping up in random places. I think you needed those people to increase the impact Thanos has when you see, obviously, Iron Man and Hulk and Black Panther and all them struggling against these minions. It just amplifies, obviously, how strong Thanos is.
I completely agree with you that these characters need to be there, but I don't think that they needed to have a backstory, and they don't have one, and I think it works.
Yeah, no, I'll agree to that. But even in comic wise, a lot of the characters aren't given backstories. I think the only one off the top of my head that actually has any form of backstory is Corvus Glaive, which is, I think, even in the movie, the only one you see on his own throughout the whole thing. Otherwise, they're always in pairs. So I don't think, like you said, I don't think a backstory was really needed, especially considering if you gave them a backstory and explained them properly, it makes them, I don't know how to explain it, it makes them way more overpowered than would suit this movie. Like, Corvus Glaive is immortal. If you stick an immortal character into the story, how are you going to warrant him losing? You can't give a backstory to characters that would then feel as though they need a story to themselves.
Well, speaking of character stories, we've mentioned the Hulk a couple of times. Now, Corey, I believe you also have the same issue the Hulk had in the movie. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I hate you so much. So, the Hulk's performance issues. Yeah, throughout the story, he obviously this is a little bit of a spoiler for the movie, but in the opening scene of the movie, Hulk gets absolutely, lack of better words, effed up by Thanos. Um, and even when you've seen Hulk get the crap kicked out of him in previous movies, no one has ever drawn blood. Thanos, in a quick, maybe 5-minute scene, manages to draw blood on the Hulk and basically scare him. Throughout the rest of the movie, you have Banner trying to, in main parts of the story, try and bring Hulk out to fight, and him blatantly refusing solely because he feels as though he isn't good enough anymore after being beaten by Thanos, which isn't specifically said, but I think it's a very recognizable point, is the fact that he's petrified. For the first time in any of these movies, it shows Hulk as someone who has fear of someone stronger than him.
What about you, Delphine? Do you feel that this gave you greater depth to the character of the Hulk, or do you find that it was just there for a comic relief?
I was very confused by this. I thought it just was a little bit weird. And I'm not, I honestly don't really have an opinion on it because I haven't been thinking about it a whole lot, but I'm not really sure what they tried to do with it. I was very confused by this. For me, it did not bring much purpose to the character. So I don't know if it was because the Hulk is very powerful and it didn't work in the story. I actually didn't quite get it.
One of the things I would like to mention is that Ed Norton never had this problem. So maybe we should bring Ed Norton back so that we don't have this issue in future movies.
How do you know Ed Norton doesn't have the performance issues, Dan? I know you're very in love with him. Is there something you're not mentioning?
Yeah, we're very close. We write letters to each other all the time, so he lets me know he doesn't have this issue.
I don't know. I think you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the character when it was done by Ed Norton, as it showed you a different side to the Hulk. I think it may have taken a few extra movies, but even you have to agree that the whole, I guess it's common term now, the performance issue aspect of the Hulk in the new Avengers movie gives that same vibe, but just for an entire movie.
Yeah, the thing about this is that it was probably the first time with Mark Ruffalo that I felt that there was any kind of depth to it. Now, they tried romance with him, but I never bought into that side of his character. It felt very shallow and forced. Whereas this time, I did actually feel like there was depth and a bit of a struggle within the character, and there was a bit more personality. And because with Mark Ruffalo, he's been there just as a comic relief almost. When he turns into the Hulk, it's funny, people get clobbered, and everyone has a laugh. Whereas this time, they took away his ability to clobber people and gave him some actual real storyline for it other than generic romance. So I thought that was a very interesting side for it, but then it kind of took out the need for the Hulk to actually be part of the story as well. He almost seemed wasted because he didn't do anything in Hulk fashion.
Yeah, look, it's as I said, for me it was very strange. In particular, given the fact that one of the big aspects of them going to Wakanda, of course, is access to technology, and Shuri, T'Challa's sister, is there, and pretty much takes over when it comes to any of the science and so on, and then Bruce Banner is not helpful at all in trying to fix the issue with Vision. So the whole reason as to why he's there is actually a little bit strange. I'm of course always wondering whether this is something they're going to have to fix in the next movie, and it might mean that we may get a return of the Hulk with a vengeance.
You mentioned next movies and things like that. Obviously, being as big as it is, there's going to be a lot more Marvel movies. Captain Marvel, we know that that's on the release date. That's coming out next year. After the credits, minor spoiler, the reference is that she is being brought into whatever may be happening in the future. How do you guys feel about Captain Marvel's appearance? Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's going to change things? Where does it go from here?
I think that it's the sign that they're finally going to do what they've been talking about doing for quite a few movies now, which is introducing the new era of the Avengers. Like, they've introduced Bucky Barnes as Winter Soldier, obviously. They've got Ant-Man, Captain Marvel, Black Panther. They have all these new characters, and with the story progressing further and further, obviously Robert Downey Jr. can't do this forever. Chris Evans can't do this forever. And I think with the announcement that Captain Marvel is being brought into it when she is such a... Like I've mentioned, her character is named after the franchise. That should tell you all you need to know about the character. So I think this is that one sign that they're finally going to move into this next generation of superheroes. And I know Delphine agrees, but I think it's very nice that they've done this by initially bringing, I think it's the first female-centered movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. And with Captain Marvel, we're also, I think, going to explore a wider range of powers for superheroes. And again, that just opens the doors to different villains. And we're not just now on Earth or in the galaxy. Everything is coming together. And I think it just opens up a world of possibilities for the MCU. So that's quite exciting. And indeed, I think of course it's a girl, so I'm all for it. I'm too excited with Valkyrie and, all the cast of the female cast of Black Panther, to see more girls take a central place in the plots. But I do think as well it's going to be a good link to what we can expect in the future as a relay in terms of the type of heroes and also their abilities, because we need them to be able to do more. And Captain Marvel, I think, with her powers, is going to open that up.
Definitely. Now, you mentioned the possibilities of all these different characters that we haven't seen. Who else do you expect that will be coming along in the Marvel timeline?
Well, the one that's already been hinted at, and I am over the moon excited about, is the quick reference at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy 2, with the reference to Adam Warlock. Knowing just how important he is throughout a lot of comics, and how important he is in the Thanos Quest storyline specifically, I wouldn't be surprised if he does pop up in the next movie, although I think it'd be a little bit forced. I'd like to see a standalone movie first. But yeah, I'm really, really excited to see Adam Warlock in a movie adaptation.
Can you tell us a little bit about him? What does he do? Why is he important?
The main reason why he's important is he's actually the one that is entrusted with the gauntlet after it's taken off Thanos. Which is why, I can see him being involved in the next movie, although it's a big movie to introduce a character properly. Not saying that they haven't done it before, because they did it with Spider-Man in Civil War, but just in general, I think they'd be better off giving a standalone movie where they introduce the character. But either way, I'd be happy with it. Like I said, it's just a very interesting character, and the fact that it was referenced to the end of Guardians of the Galaxy makes me think that if he's not introduced in the Infinity War sequel, then he will be introduced in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which has already been announced as well.
So what's his special ability? What does he do that makes him worthy of this gauntlet and to change things? What can he do?
He sort of has a lot of, I guess, abilities that are, I guess, taken from other characters but put into one. He has superhuman strength, speed, agility, and durability. He's basically the Marvel version of Superman. but with also energy manipulation and absorption. He has matter manipulation, and he's an expert in magic. He's also very, very closely affiliated, like I mentioned, with Guardians of the Galaxy. So it's a nice little extra character that they can throw in there.
All right, guys. Well, we are getting a bit closer to the end of this episode. Do you have any other points that you think are important to listeners in regards to either Infinity War or the MCU in general?
I think basically I've heard a lot of things going on about how the next movie should end and how the storyline should progress when Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. leave and that sort of stuff. But with a little bit of comic book knowledge and a slight idea of what they're planning to do after all of that's said and done, give it a chance. I know a lot of people are sort of going, I don't want to watch it if Robbie Downey Jr. is not there. I don't want to watch it if Chris Evans isn't Captain America. But I genuinely think it's going to be worth watching. There's a lot of things that they can do, and there's a lot of things that are in the works to already be doing that I think are really, really interesting.
And Delphine, any other important points that you can throw in here?
No, look, I think it's all very exciting. We also have some TV shows that are, some of them part of the MCU and some of them that have other characters that are not technically linked currently in the universe. And I'm just sure we're going to see a whole lot more of superheroes in the next few years.
That is a very interesting point, is that there are a couple of different series. You've got Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which obviously tie in from the first Avengers film, and then they have a lot of overall plots that tie in with everything. Then you've got Agent Carter, who obviously relates back to Captain America, but Netflix have their own series of Marvel characters. You've got Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Luke Cage and Iron Fist, even the Punisher as well. None of these characters seem to flow into the MCU in terms of all the movies we've seen, Avengers and all that. Do you guys feel like they're part of that same universe, or do you think they're actually a bit separate?
No, I think they're completely separate, just because I think the best way to describe it is all those characters you mentioned also have their own joint series called Defenders. Defenders is basically the adult version of Avengers. When you have characters like the Punisher, Luke Cage, Daredevil, those sort of darker characters, I don't think you could throw them in with Captain America and Iron Man and those sort of things without it feeling really out of place. So I think they're going to keep them completely separate for the entirety of the MCU.
Yeah, that's right. In my mind, they are in the same universe, but I think it's important perhaps that they remain separated because they have very different tones and different styles. I really loved the Netflix series and the very dark tone of some of the series. The Punisher is excellent. If you have not watched it, you have to. But Jessica Jones as well is very noir, and that's something that works for this series. It allows us to really understand in depth the characters that I don't think we're able to see as movies because there is not enough time to develop the characters perhaps. But sometimes a little reference here and there could be nice.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, we might wrap it up there. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Delphine, thank you so much for joining us on your first episode.
It was my pleasure. I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
And Corey, thank you for joining us once again. Looks like we might be seeing a lot more of you in the future.
Yeah, I hope so. I've really enjoyed doing this podcast and the previous one, so I'm hoping I'm back for a lot more.
Perfect. Well, to everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you find us on Facebook or Reddit, YouTube, just to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. If you have any ideas for topics or that, please, there's a thread on Reddit that you can suggest anything. And if you have any specific requests or that, please let us know. You should have by now seen the contest announcement. So for the winners, please make sure you contact us if you haven't already done so. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
when he came out with Planet Hulk, I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't prepared. He turns around, I've never read a comic book in my life. Oh yeah, but Planet Hulk storyline, where the fuck did that come from? Is in the 90s, he snaps the... Okay, I can't mention that, hold on.
Yeah. He snaps his heels together and...
and says he wants to go home. Alright.
Well, I was coming to a point, but I've completely lost it. Oh my god.